Hey, folks, welcome back. This is Mark Devine with the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Super stoked to have you join me today. Wow, we are going to have an unbelievably cool conversation with my friend and world-class author, Steven Pressfield. But before we get into that, and I introduce Steven, for the few of you who might not know who he is, please rate this podcast. It really, really, really helps other people to find it. You know, people search and they want to find the highest rated podcast. So if ours continues to be the highest rated or one of the highest rated, then more and more people will find it. And that helps others get to listen to people like Steven. So go to iTunes if you listen to it and just click on 5 stars, if you would. How's that for a bold ask?
I like it. I like it.
Steven Pressfield. Man. So let me give you an intro and then we'll just it'll roll into just us chatting. But I first met Steve by reading Gates of Fire. To this day, my favorite book. And then I was so intrigued. He'll remember this, but years ago when my business was just NavySeals.com, and I was doing content, I asked him for an interview and we had a really fun conversation, and that ended up as an audio and actually a kind of a transcribed podcast on NavySeals.com. That was years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since then, man, Steven, you've written about like 10 books since then, probably.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. But I love your story, and you've really helped a lot of creative people as well. Steve's written like another one of my favorite books, and a lot of authors as well. It's called The War of Art. Really, really good book about overcoming resistance and trying to find out how to find your muse as a creator. It doesn't have to be an author. So, Steve, welcome. I love to talk about both things. Like I want to go back to Gates of Fire and talk about that. And I want to talk about writing, and I want to talk about your current book. But before that, just how are you doing? I mean, you've been busier than a one-legged man in an asking contest, haven't you?
Well, it's great to see you again, Mark. It's great to be on.
Thanks
for having me on.
Of course. My pleasure.
Yeah, my last 6 months or so, I've been just promoting my new book, A Man at Arms. Which is sort of an out-of-body experience for me.
I bet.
Trying to, get out of my introvert normal state of mind and be, like you just asking people to rate the podcast.
Sure.
That's a hard thing to do. At least
it is.
To say to somebody, please do this, right? Here's because I hate it when people ask me stuff,
Oh, I know.
So
that was me overcoming my resistance to actually asking people to buy our products.
Yeah.
But then, the way I did that was to recognize that how can I serve if people aren't finding out about us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's a tough leap to make though, but
It
anyway,
is.
that's what I've been doing. So,
Well, I tell you what, your team, and I'm sure you have a good team behind your back, has done a phenomenal job with this book launch. I mean, I'm taking notes. It's been really, really cool. And I love, by the way, one of the things that Steve did was offered an actual signed page from the original manuscript of 300, or not 300, but Gates of Fire. Probably not the first person who mixed up the movie with your book. Yeah, Gates of Fire, to buy, as a gift for buying 10 copies of his book. I just got that in the mail, and even the presentation of that was just phenomenal, right? The way it was packaged. And
so, I got that idea from, who Ryan Holiday is.
Ryan's a friend of mine, for sure. Yeah, he's a great guy.
And I was visiting him. I went to visit him in Austin,
right,
to ask him to kind of help me understand what marketing was all about, marketing yourself, marketing a book.
Right.
And I had this original, I still have it, 802-page manuscript of Gates of Fire. And my thought was to give the whole thing away to somebody.
Well, it's 801 pages now because I have one of them.
Okay, you're right. We replaced though. We copied the page and put it back in.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, he said, no, don't do that. Do one page at a time. And people will frame it. He said, I'd love to have one myself, So that was all his idea. And I'm sort of talking about getting into the marketing aspect or the frame of mind. I figured maybe 3 people would respond.
Right.
And, we've had maybe 100 people or something. That's been pretty amazing. So
That is amazing.
there's something to be said for asking, you know?
Right.
I'm trying to teach myself that.
If you don't ask, you don't receive.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your journey as an author. Like I've read a little bit about it, and but I think it'd be interesting for other people. Like, what got you into it, and tell us how you were an instant success.
Yeah, it was an instant
Just like me,
success after
instant
30
success.
years. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Uh, well, I don't know. It's a long, long story, Mark, but
Start at the
bas-
very beginning. I would say I
basically,
was born at a very young age.
I was uh, I was working as like a junior copywriter at an ad agency, a big ad agency in New York. And I had a boss named Ed Hannibal, and he quit and wrote a novel, and it was a success. And overnight, he was like this famous guy and with a lot of money. And da, 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 da. So I said to myself at age
That looks
23,
easy.
why don't I do that? And so 30 years later, I finally got something published. Um,
Wow.
and in between, there was a lot of ups and downs.
So what did you first try to write? Did you try to write, romance novels or these military histories
I first actually tried to write a book about Marine boot camp,
Oh, interesting.
which I had just gotten out of not very long ago. I was in the reserves at that point,
Right.
so I could still be a civilian. But I remember the experience was, you know, like anything, like not the same as Navy SEAL training, but it was
Right.
certainly a mind blowing experience to me being a civilian.
Right.
So I was trying to write about that.
And did that ever get published?
No, that never even came close. In fact, when I got like 99% of the way through it, resistance reared its ugly head,
Okay.
and I just choked. I blew everything up, my life, my marriage, everything, and
Wow.
rather than take it across the finish line.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go there. What is resistance, in your lexicon?
Resistance with a capital R. If anybody has my book, The War of Art, that you mentioned before, Mark, is about that.
Mm-hmm.
And resistance with a capital R is what radiates, if you're a writer, off of this.
It radiates off of the keyboard.
It's a negative force of self-sabotage that takes the form of a voice in your head that says to you, you're a bum, you're a loser. Who are you to try to do this enterprise, whatever it is, any dream you have, a business, a book, anything creative? Who are you to dare to even think about this? You're too old, you're too young, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're what? Not enough education, too much education, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it also takes the form of fear, where we're totally paralyzed with the fear of success and fear of failure. And so we procrastinate, we resort to perfectionism, we yield to distractions, any kind of distractions, alcohol, drugs, abuse of others, abuse of ourselves, drama in our lives. We create, or we just run away. Anyway, so it is this negative force that it doesn't reside out in the world; it's in our own heads.
Right.
We're being our own worst enemy. That's what I call resistance.
I love that. So we're creating that resistance, and it sounds to me like, from your definition, you're resisting your higher self, like you're resisting your creative force that wants to present itself to the world, but then your more limited ego, which is full of fear and all these biases and things and shadow, all these things you talked about, is basically saying, no, we're not going to let you express yourself.
I would say that's exactly it, Mark. That's exactly it.
And we all have it, right? I don't think anyone's immune.
Everybody's got it. I can tell you because I've had like 10,000 emails from people after The War of Art has come out, and they're all, sometimes people pour out their hearts to you, these terrible, tragic stories of, God knows what. But everybody's got it. It's the same voice in my head, in your head, in everybody's head. It's a force of nature, like gravity.
Yeah, I think it's, kind of the human journey or the human experience,
Yeah.
right? So it's in everybody. And if you don't face the resistance and strive to overcome it, however well you might do it, then you're basically shirking from life. Right. And I think that leads to major existential crisis in a lot of people.
Yes, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, uh, almost any vice, any crime, any form of abuse or self-abuse,
Hmm.
I think really comes from that. I think a lot of, not to get political
Yeah.
about this, but a lot of the stuff that we see, the partisanship and the
Yeah.
stuff that's
Yeah.
going on in the world today is, I think, people on the individual level not facing the demon that's
That's
inside
right.
them
Right.
and projecting
And
it out
projecting it out. Right.
onto the other side. And of course, there's like a multi-billion-dollar industry promoting that stuff,
That's right.
right? And
Right.
politicians are building careers on that and dividing people, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it all comes from not facing whatever dream we may have or whatever aspiration we have
That's
for
fascinating.
ourselves.
So what you're pointing to is that a culture can have this resistance, and if they don't face it, face down, what I would say, stare down the wolf of fear
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
overcome that, then you're going to get all this negative projection and this, the chaos and the ugliness that we see today.
And I think cultures absolutely do that. I mean, you think about
Right.
Nazi Germany,
Right.
think about Rome in her, in her declining years, or
Mhm.
Athens. I mean, it's a collective thing as well as an individual thing.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we could spend a lot of time going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah.
so, so I'm curious, is what inspired you to write The War of Art? Because you could have just kept on going after your novels, and you did such a great job of them, and just kept on individually overcoming your resistance. I mean, what caused you to want to share this with people? Kind of take a tack to the left and be more of like a mentor to writers or
It didn't
creators.
come out of altruism, Mark. I can tell you that. It was, you know, when I started having some success as a writer, friends of mine would come to me and say, "Oh, I've got a book in me.
Mm-hmm.
Can I talk to you about this?" And so I would sit up, till 2 a.m. with friends, trying to psych them up,
Right.
because they would be innocents, right? They would have a million excuses. I've got a job, I've got a husband, I've got a wife, I've got kids, blah, 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 blah. So I would sort of introduce them to this concept of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of formulated it in my own mind. It became clear to me in my own mind that, and just telling them that the writing part is not the hard part. The hard part is sitting down to write,
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I sort of talking this out verbally, all the ideas kind of came together in my mind. And of course, nobody ever listened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody went out and wrote a book or did they just, resistance defeated them from the start. So finally, I just thought to myself, I just can't keep sitting up at night till 2 a.m. with people. Let me take a few months, write this thing down. And then when anybody asks me, I'll just say, here, read this. So that's why I wrote it. I just kind of wrote it to get it out of the way and stop having to talk to people at 2 a.m.
That's funny.
And it came out very fast, by the way, Mark. It was like,
did it?
Bam! It was just out in 2 months. It was done.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, when it's kind of like just downloading, right? Poof.
Yeah,
There it is.
yeah, yeah. And it was not an instant hit either. It took a long time. It took years.
Oh yeah, totally get that. It's like brewing and stewing, and all these patterns are starting to get connected. And then when all the puzzle and the whole mosaic is there in your mind, then it just goes down on the paper.
Yeah.
So what were some of your insights into how a creator can overcome resistance? And I know it's probably very individualized, but what were some of your insights on that?
Well, it's probably staring down the wolf in a sense. It all comes down to an act of will and an act of discipline and a creation of professional style habits.
Mm-hmm.
I have my concept in that of how to overcome it is what I call turning pro.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you know this,
You have another book by that title.
Yeah.
Right?
And the gist of it is that when we're not staring down the wolf, when the wolf is defeating us,
Right.
the reason is, or at least one reason for me, is we're thinking like amateurs. We're, an amateur, when an amateur encounters adversity, he or she folds, right? An amateur is a weekend warrior, an amateur is a dabbler. And when an amateur will work when they feel like it, right? They say, oh, gee, I don't feel like working today, so I won't work. But if you flip the switch in your head and you say, I'm a professional, then it doesn't matter what you feel like. Today is a work day, you get up and you do it, right? And, a professional shows up every day, a professional stays on the job every day, a professional plays hurt, right? If things are not 100% perfect, a professional doesn't even think about that, Michael Jordan, if he's hurt his Achilles tendon, he plays, and so that's the way that helped me get over resistance, because resistance kicked my ass for like 7 or 8 years, just chased me all around the country. I couldn't do anything, I was just going from one terrible job to another job and unable to write, unable even to put the typewriter on the desk, so finally, that was,
and the longer it goes, the worse it gets.
Was to just sort of say, I'm a professional, maybe I'm not making any money, but I'm going to think of myself as a professional, not as an amateur. And that helped a lot.
Right. And the longer you resist overcoming resistance, the harder and harder it gets, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine after that 7 or 8 years, like it took an act of God almost to get you back into writing. I have a question. So when, this notion of the hero's journey that you've talked about, and you did this beautiful video series on, for the launch of the Man at Arms, we talked about archetypes and the hero. How does the hero relate to the professional idea? Because it seems like what you're saying is, if you want to be professional, then you've got to take that journey. You got to step into that hero's journey, because that's where you're going to meet the obstacles and the resistance. You're going to get kicked in the cojones, right? And have to fall back and get some skills and mentors and all that, right? Is it similar?
I have a whole theory about, I'll get into the weeds a little bit here, Mark.
Good. I like the weeds.
I think that we all have a hero's journey. We all have many hero's journeys.
Right.
Let me go back just slightly and just kind of define hero's journey for whatever it's worth. It comes from Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, and the concept that in our minds, from birth, in our psyche, somewhere in the collective unconscious, is this kind of script, and it's or a piece of software that must have come from evolution. It must have come from, hundreds of thousands of years of human beings living life, right? And the hero's journey is it's like a template and it goes like something like this. The hero starts in the ordinary world. It's a kind of a boring, normal situation. Something happens, what they call the call to adventure. And the hero resists it at first, that step called the refusal of the call. Then there's a moment when the hero says, okay, I'm going to answer this call, whatever it may be, to join the SEALs, to enlist in something, to fall in love, to start a business, to write a book, to anything like that. And then there's a moment called crossing the threshold. And the hero goes from the ordinary world to the extraordinary world. And then a sort of an adventure unfolds. And I believe that this happens to all of us in our regular life. I mean, it can happen in a cubicle. I mean, Marcel Proust had his hero's journey while he was in bed, so it's, and at some point, after encountering obstacles and enemies and allies and friends and shapeshifters and we kind of reach the goal, and then there's a chase where they chase us, and we finally return home. And if you look at, and it's sort of like a great example is The Wizard of Oz, of Dorothy getting swept up by the tornado, and eventually she returns home. She comes back to Kansas. Or Odysseus eventually comes back to Ithaca. And so my whole this is what this is all about is, I think that, like, for somebody like me that was running away from his calling, from writing for years and years and years, that was sort of my hero's journey, where I'm encountering allies and enemies and fucking up and bump. And at some point you come to the place where you say, I can't take this shit anymore. I've got to turn pro, right? If you're an alcoholic, you wake up in the gutter one day and you say to yourself, I've got a problem. I've got to face it. I've got a problem, and I've got to change my life. And I think at that point, in my theory, we go from the hero's journey to what I call the artist's journey. And at that point, we've turned pro. And like for a writer, let's say, for me, I got to the point where I say, okay, I'm a fucking writer. Is it okay to swear on the show here?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'm going to do
Apple,
it.
Apple might bleep it out, but
I don't care, Oh, okay. Apple. All right. Well, we can't mess with Apple.
Right.
Okay, I don't care. I'm going to do this. Then the next question becomes, if you're a writer, what are you going to write about? The question sort of becomes, what's your gift? And I know that you've gone through this,
Right.
It's kind of a transition a lot of times out of the military. It's like, what's next?
Right.
I've had this whole this is your hero's journey. And I finally have defined who I am. I kind of have a sense of who I am. What's my gift? What will I spend the rest of my life expressing,
Right.
So I don't know. I
That's-
forgot even what the question was.
No,
Mark,
you
but that's my answer.
you not only answered the question, but you provided me a really interesting and cool insight or distinction between the hero's journey and the artist's journey, because you're right. So for me, my hero's journey was from CPA to Navy SEAL. Like the insight that I was not meant to be a merchant, archetype, and early in my life, my early 20s, I was meant to be the warrior archetype and go fulfill that. So that took considerable courage, because everything was against me. My family was against me, society was against me, the standards that everyone took to be normal were against me. So I had to go against the tide and overcome all that. But then I was a pro, right? At that point, by the time I got out of the SEALs, I was a pro. I was a professional. I knew how to show up. I knew how to work hard. I knew how to think well, but I didn't know what the next outlet was going to be. And for me, it started out as an entrepreneur. I figured out, well, okay, my next creative outlet is entrepreneurial. And I used to think that started another hero's journey, but I think you're right. I was already a pro. I knew how to overcome and slay the dragons. I just needed to figure out what my creative outlet was. And the creative journey is slightly different, though, isn't it, than the hero's journey? So
yeah, it is.
What's unique about the artist's journey that's different than the hero's journey?
I do think that it is also a hero's journey.
Okay.
But
good.
what's unique about it is you are now, it's like the Blues Brothers. You're now on a mission from God, you've and all the other stuff sort of falls away. It's like,
Okay.
I say that when I was on my hero's journey, which took place in the United States, I put 393,000 miles on my vehicle, running from here to. Since then, I hardly drive to the grocery store. It's all now in here. It's all about what am I going to do? Now I'm able to sit down and write and produce and let my gift come out. But at the same time, and I'm sure you feel this way too, Mark, this is my instrument here,
Yeah.
and I have to, it's here and it's here. And so I have to take care of my instrument as well. And
Right.
I include my instrument, professionalism, self-discipline, self-reinforcement, self-validation, that stuff that's really not your art, that's not your gift, but it's what you need to, it's shit you need to have together to make your gift work. If we go back to, say, Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or somebody like that, their gift is what they can do on the basketball court, but they've got to make sure that that body holds together and the mind holds together for the whole season. And they know what the playoffs are like, and they're married, they have kids, they have a wife, they know how to, compartmentalize or blend or whatever they have to do to be able to deliver on the court. So I think that's a hero's journey too, but it's a really focused hero's journey. It's a contained hero's journey.
That's really interesting. And that's where disciplining oneself to have a professional practice, or a practice around your professional skills and habits, right? So you show up every day and you do certain things to cultivate the character that's worthy to express the next creative outlet.
Yeah. Which I'm sure you learned in the SEALs. You already sort of had that in one what's the word, application, in a military application, a leadership application. So now the question is, how do you take that, internally and externally, because you're going to be, helping people.
Yeah. A lot of people listening are either aspiring authors or, have heard that it's good to have a book or good to write a blog or, whatever their creative outlet is. So I think they'd be interested in hearing, what is your practice? Like, what is it that keeps you growing and on the edge and makes it easier to overcome resistance every time you start another project?
Well, it's never easy, and it never goes away for me anyway. That's for sure. It's never easy. I'm starting a new book now, and I'm just in the resistance is beating the shit out of me, and it always does, But I mean, I definitely have routines and habits and rituals and that I do every day to so that I'm ready to do my work when the time comes.
Yeah. So can we get, like, for me, I've shared my morning routine with my people, or people are listening. It starts at 5 a.m. and I have a gratitude and a meditation and a visualization and a breathing practice. And I do some of that with my wife, which, is kind of a relational practice. And then I move into my yoga, and then I do my workout, all of that takes me like 3 hours, but it's the foundation for my day, So when I go to sit down at the desk and open up a Word doc, a blank Word doc, I feel like I've already won, I've got some strong momentum. So what do you do to build that kind of momentum?
Let me ask you, Mark, what is your concept behind that? Why? And my day is the same as yours, just like that.
Right. Yeah. Why does it work?
Why not? Let me ask you this. Why not just pop right out of bed and sit down at the typewriter or whatever?
And that might work for some people, but what I think is, it's like, this mind that we have is so much more powerful than most people really can realize, right? It's creating our reality. Like I really believe that the more I experience the spiritual practice side of things, the more I recognize that we create our reality, and our minds have the power to create heaven or hell on earth. But if you leave it to chance, it's more likely to slip into hell territory because of all the negative influences on us, right? And so I also have this kind of warrior tradition mindset that every day is a self-enclosed lifetime. I call it one day, one life. When you wake up in the morning, it's like a rebirth or a new birth. And when you close your eyes at night, it's like a symbolic death. And what happens between those two moments is an opportunity for a lifetime of learning and growth. It's like the Buddha said, you could find enlightenment in a single breath if you're paying attention, if you're close enough, right? So I have this philosophy that when you wake up, when you become conscious again after a night's sleep, you got to seize the mind and bring it back to its source and bring it bring it into alignment with his calling. And I do want to talk about the Legend of Bagger Vance here, into alignment with like why we're on this planet, what we're supposed to do about that wisdom or that insight about why we're on this planet. And then what am I going to do today about that? Right? What's my major task? You know, what do I need to write? What do I need to think? What do I need to say? Who do I need to deal with? And then I've got to follow the warrior's tradition, because I'm a warrior, to basically win in my mind before I step foot in the battlefield. And that's where all the practices are, is to like really, you know, when I step out into the day, and that could be like opening my email as my first action.
I know just what you mean. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm ready. I'm armored up. I've got my sword and my shield, you know, and I'm already won because I've seen everything happen in my mind already. That's what I think.
Oh, that's great. That's fascinating. And my day sort of starts the same way. You know, I get up really early. I go to the gym.
Right.
You know, I have breakfast with some friends. I come home and I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm getting my mind ready for what's to come.
Right.
My friend Randy Wallace, who wrote Braveheart,
great book.
he has a thing called Little Successes. And I think it's really just sort of what you're talking about. And from this moment he gets up, he tries to have a series of little successes before he actually gets to do his work. He might be directing a movie or whatever it is. And he even counts like brushing his teeth as a little success. And he's also a great fitness guy early in the morning, you know, where he does this thing, you know, he actually trains with Laird Hamilton, where they're doing underwater, whatever they do, weights under the water.
I've done that with Laird, by the way. It's a blast.
So you know what it is, right?
I do.
So it's the whole sort of concept, and I know you know this, of like, when you're done with that, you say, nothing I do today for the rest of the day is going to be as hard as what I just did.
That's right.
So my sort of day is the same as yours, in that concept. And I'll just throw something. I know you know this, but this was new to me. A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Lion's Gate that was about the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. And I got to interview a bunch of Israeli fighter pilots. And one of the things that they all did was, before a mission, just like you with the mental stuff, they would like fly that mission in their head.
That's right.
Over and over and over, you know, and preparing themselves for everything that could go wrong, right? My engine flames out at, 30,000 feet, so that by the time they actually got in the plane, they, like you say, they'd won the war already. Nothing could happen that would startle them, or at least that was the theory. So I do think, again, that's kind of the warrior mindset, which is the hero mindset, which is the professional mindset.
Right. So when you sit down, and I actually saw a typewriter behind you, you probably don't use that anymore, but when you sit down to your keyboard, what's your, and you're looking at a blank sheet of paper, what's going through your mind?
Terror, I think, originally. Well, I'm sort of at that stage right now, really doing something. And I'm just trying. I'm a big believer at the start of a day, not to mess around, to plunge right in. Like if it's the equivalent of a ice cold pool, don't just stand on the edge, get in. And try to get something going right away, even if you don't know what you're doing.
So you just start writing, and then hopefully it starts
from where I was yesterday, if I've got a story going. But if not, I'll just try to ask myself sort of what needs to be done, what's missing, what do I need to get going, and then just try to get started on that. And at the same time, I'll pull back from that and try to take the more global view, and ask myself, what's the structure of this thing? What comes first? What comes second? But a lot of it is just sort of thrashing, at least at the beginning.
Do you find that, like, in the beginning, I imagine you have this, like, okay, this the book is going to have this structure and it's going to have these chapters. And I kind of generally know the flow, that once you get into a project that it's kind of like no plan survives contact with the enemy. Suddenly it's all falls apart and you have to reconstruct it on the fly.
Yes, that's true. And also there's always a moment, you're preparing your structuring something, what's act one, what's act two, and there comes a moment where you just have to say to yourself, just write the goddamn thing, and, just tell the story.
Right.
And that's usually the moment when things start to happen for good,
I would love to learn how you got interested in, and then did research on a couple projects. And the second one I want to talk about is 300, because that's my favorite work. But the first one I want to talk about is your rendition of one of my favorite spiritual texts, the Bhagavad Gita. And you wrote a book called The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Bagger Vance.
Bagger Vance. How did you get interested in that? And, where did that come from? And how did that research happen for you? And that's such a cool story.
That was the first thing I did that actually was a success. That was after 30 years. That was the one.
That was it.
And it just sort of came to me. I mean, I'd always been a fan of the Bhagavad Gita. Mm-hmm. And I've read it in like multiple translations, and I love the whole concept of the warrior being instructed by his charioteer, right, who happens to be God, right, in human form, right? And so one day I just thought, let me steal this structure, and I'll put it into a golf story, which at the time I thought it was like the dumbest idea I'd ever had in my life. It's like, who is going to be interested in this,
Right.
But I was, it kind of had seized me. And that was another book that really came very fast.
Interesting.
And I was just I believe in the muse, I believe in the goddess,
Yeah.
Just sort of swept along. And now when I look back on the structure of that book, I don't know how I ever came up with it. It just materialized.
When you talk about the muse, it sounds to me like when I talk about channeling, like I've stopped using it when I go give speeches. Like I'm presenting at Tony Robbins's Wealth Mastery in front of 3,500 people next Sunday. I'm like, and that
Are
used
you
to
experiencing any resistance to that?
But yes, but not anywhere near like I used to, because now in the past I would think, I've got to have this all structured out, and I got to have a presentation, and PowerPoint, and blah blah blah, and I got to practice it, and all the things that they actually recommend you do.
Yeah.
And I used to do that, and I was an okay speaker. When I stopped doing that, because I've mastered the content right now, I've mastered the content. I don't need to do that anymore. And when I stopped doing that and just just visualized it and believed that I could really provide a transformative experience and a lot of valuable content, and that it's going to be fun. When I started doing that and just showing up and opening up to the mystery of allowing what is supposed to be, then all of a sudden, all this information just starts flowing through me. It's almost like I opened a conduit to universal intelligence. And it sounds like that's what you experienced, or maybe you continue to experience.
At least in that time I did.
Starting with Bagger Vance.
Let me ask you something, Mark. When you do a speech like that, do you know what the finish is?
I have no more than 4 major themes that I'm going to weave together, and I weave them all together with stories. And that's a really good point. I don't always know what the finish is going to be, because again, I'm not that kind of person that like starts with a joke and has, the grand finale. I really am much more of an intuitive and spontaneous speaker, and it always seems to work. Because it requires a lot of trust.
I mean, I would be worried if I were doing that it's like, how am I going to end this thing? Do I just stop,
Right. I have gotten into trouble in the past for that. Right. So it's something I need to continue to work on.
Let me recommend, what you're really talking about is kind of the principles of improv, like
Right.
improvisational comedy. And
Right.
there's a wonderful book that I recommend everybody that's listening called Improv Wisdom.
Awesome.
I always blank. Patricia Madsen is the writer.
Okay.
Madsen. Improv Wisdom. It's a short little book like The War of Art, and it's really great. Patricia Madsen was taught improv at Stanford for years, for like 35 years, and her class was always just packed. And she's just a wonderful teacher, and this book is really great. And it's a lot of that principle of kind of trust the force, Luke,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right. That's cool. But I think ultimately, at the mastery level, you have to master the content, right? And the practice, right? And then that allows the art to flow a little more freely. But, to be fair, if I had no structure at all in my mind, it would probably be a disaster. So I do have some.
Uh-huh.
But so with Bagger Vance, so you were already intimate with the book, so it's not like you had to go out and research and interview people. You couldn't interview Krishna.
No. Yeah, there was like no research for this at all.
No
really.
research.
Yeah, I just made it up.
That's fascinating. Did people come to you and say, "Hey, this is about the Bhagavad Gita," or were
Oh, that's a great question, Mark. It was like out of like 1,000 people, one person
one
would
person?
would say that. Nobody got it at all, which is fine with me.
Right.
But once every now and then somebody would come out and say, "Hey, didn't you steal a structure from the Bhagavad Gita?" Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be instructive before we turn our attention to 300, just to help listeners
Gates of fire.
Yeah. Oh, Gates of Fire. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah.
So to help people who haven't read the Bhagavad Gita understand the main lesson, right? So what do you think the main lesson or lessons are from your
Okay.
perspective?
It's basically, it's been called the Hindu Bible.
Right.
So it's really sort of, and it's short, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not a long book at all. You can read
Mm-hmm.
it in a couple hours. And basically, it starts with um, Arjuna, the great warrior, having a kind of a little nervous breakdown on the battlefield.
Right.
And his charioteer, who happens to be Krishna, i.e., God in human form, says, "Okay, I'm going to instruct you. I'm, giving you spiritual instruction." It's basically like God saying to you and me, "I'm going to tell you what the world is like," right?
Right.
And it's about things like karma. He talks about absolutely about karma, about previous lives, what that all means, about attachment and non-attachment,
Yeah.
duality and non-duality. And the other thing he says is that's really very un-Christian and un-Western is he's talking about the battle, and he says to Arjuna, "Go out there and kill everybody. Just kill them." And
Right.
and Arjuna says, but they're good people. I don't want to
They're
kill
my
them.
cousins and uncles,
Yeah,
actually, right?
yeah, yeah. And so Krishna says to him, and this is really sort of a tough concept to wrap your mind around. He says to Arjuna, "I have killed them all already. All you're doing is enacting what I have done." And then the other thing he says, of course, is death is not real.
Right.
So that's another premise. And then the other really cool thing about the Gita is when Arjuna looks across the battlefield and he sees these enemies with their chariots and their horses, and they're ready to fight, right? And he can see their faces and he recognizes them and he knows them. They're teachers, kinsmen, whatever. That's why he doesn't want to kill them. And he names them. He says, "There I saw on his chariot so and so. Next to him was so and so." But the trick of it is that in Sanskrit, the names of these warriors also mean certain vices,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
so and so is arrogance,
Mm-hmm.
so and so is complacency, so and so is self doubt. So that when Krishna says to Arjuna, "Slay these foes," he's really talking about the inner war.
Right.
Slay these vices in yourself.
Right.
And then the main thing, of course, is what he calls yoga, which is not really yoga like asana yoga that we might practice down at Hermosa Beach,
Mm-hmm.
but union with God, meditation,
Mm-hmm.
entering that state of So that's kind of the short version of
Yeah.
this. Of,
Well, I love that. Thanks so much. And there's one more kind of insight that really helped me, and it relates to Krishna's really telling Arjuna to get off his ass and turn pro, right? To overcome the capital R resistance. And that if he doesn't do his duty as a warrior and go fight this battle, then he will live a life of regret. He'll be a
yes,
fraction of
yes,
the man that he's supposed to be. Isn't that fascinating? That helped me
yes.
so much as a SEAL when I had to go into battle. I'm like, I really don't want to kill anybody. Right. But when I read that, I was like, oh, I understand now a little bit better. Like, this is my duty. It's my duty as a warrior. Right. And
Yeah.
if that
And
happens,
not necessarily your duty to a flag or something, but your duty to
correct. No.
yourself.
Duty to myself or
Yeah.
to God, right, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so now let's turn to Gates of Fire. The reason I keep mixing up with 300 is I could swear they took your book and almost verbatim created the script for the movie. Do you think there's some truth in that, or like, did you get any credit for that? Or the movie
No,
was
I don't
phenomenal,
think there is. I mean, because it came from a real event, right? The real Battle of Thermopylae. And it
right?
came from Frank Miller's graphic novel called 300.
Okay,
And so
I
that
didn't know
was,
there was a graphic novel called
yeah,
300. Okay,
it's actually really good.
is it?
Um, I'll do the quick sort of backstory was in Hollywood, they have this thing called development. And it means when a project, a potential project goes from an idea to a script to something that's cast to something that's financed and so on and so forth. And at the time that 300 was in development, Gates of Fire was too. And
Yeah,
it was like a contest, two trains going down a track, who's going to get there?
interesting.
And they got the financing first. And so they won, which is actually okay with me because nobody at least has fucked up the book and made a shitty movie out of it.
Yeah, yeah, they did go a little off the rails with some of this
I'm not
supernatural
knocking their movie. I
stuff.
think it was, for what it was a big hit.
It was a hit, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what got you interested in the Spartans and Thermopylae, and also this kind of historical fiction? It was fascinating, and I love all the historical fiction you've done, all the way up to your current one. It's such a unique style of writing. I love it. Oh, how did you get into that? Where did that come from?
That's again, I believe in the muse, Mark, and there was no planning. I
Hmm.
mean, after Gates of Fire, I did like four other books set in the ancient world
Hmm.
before the newest one, A Man at Arms. And I never had planned that. It wasn't like when I was a kid, I wanted to write about that. It just sort of, I was led to do it. One story followed another.
Right.
But what I love about the ancient world is just what you put your finger on is that uh, you can use a word like honor with a straight face
Hmm.
when it's coming from Leonidas or
Hmm.
one of these, or Alexander the Great or something like that. I really hate the modern world. I think it sucks. I really feel like I was, this is not my
You
favorite.
should have been born back
Yeah.
back in ancient Greece and Sparta.
And maybe I was, if you
Right.
believe in previous lives. But
Right.
so I love that sort of, if you think about the Knights of the Round Table, that's not the ancient world, but it's a world where that's nobility and integrity and stuff is treated seriously. And
Right.
so, I mean, I'm sure joining the SEALs, you had to be motivated by that exact emotion, I would imagine.
Oh, I certainly was. And what's going through my mind right now is I don't think those disciplines and principles are gone in this world. They're just hidden from
Yes, they're hidden.
the they're hidden.
Yes.
And there are communities of practitioners, let's call them, like the
Yes.
SEAL warriors and I don't know, maybe the Shaolin monks and, creative artist communities and people in, Zen monasteries and also, in more modern sense, some great communities popped up like Unbeatable Mind, like what we're trying to do, people who are living by a code, right, so to speak. So it
Yeah.
does exist, but our population is 7 billion and it's just massive distraction, and so it's just hidden, I think.
Yeah.
So with I want to ask you this because I read most of those, not all. I read Gates of Fire and the Afghan Campaign, and there was one other that I read. What were the other ones?
Tides of War.
Tides of War. I did not
The
get to that.
Virtues of War about Alexander the Great.
Oh, I read the Virtues of War. Right, that was terrific. So, when you wrote, let's start with Gates of Fire. What was different about you after you were finished?
That's a great question. I think I was different after I was finished, which I had never really thought of. That's a really good question. I think that I had never kind of lived in that world, in that ancient world. Because when you're writing a book for 2 or 2.5 years and you're immersed in it,
you live it, right? You have to.
You're really part of it. And I think that it gave me confidence to embrace those virtues, those warrior virtues, even if it's just mentally, because it wasn't like I was going out shooting anybody or doing anything like that. But it did give me confidence to believe in codes of honor and believe in that kind of thing. I never thought about that before until you asked that question, Mark.
I wonder if you began to develop or live by a different code or a more refined code of honor or of ethics of your own after that.
I think so, because of course I'm evolving as a writer at the same time.
Right.
That's only my second book. So I'm just learning. I see this thing. Pardon me here. My computer's making noises here. Turn this thing off if I can. Here we go.
No problem.
Okay. Good. Okay.
So, hot off the press is this doozy of Man at Arms. And you made a comment that the lead character, is it Telamon or Teleron? Telamon. What a badass, by the way. He's definitely could have been, he would have been a Navy SEAL. You think he would have probably been the best Navy SEAL ever on the planet.
Well, there certainly are many of those cultures throughout history, that's for sure.
Definitely. You said that this character showed up 2 or 3 times previously, but it didn't show up as Telamon, did he? It showed up as a different.
Yes.
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. That's curious. I'm curious about that.
It's weird. The writing process and the creative process is a strange animal, and sometimes you can structure a book, outline it. I've got character A. He's going to come in. He's going to do this. Character B is going to do that, and then other times a character will just sort of appear on the page, as you're writing, and that's what happened with this character.
Interesting.
He appeared the first time as an assassin. And, like the Assassin's Creed type of a guy, and a real hardcore, total guy. And what was really fascinating to me was he had his own code of honor, and I didn't know what it was. I mean, until he would open his mouth. One of his codes was that he only fought for money. And he had a reason for that. Not that he was a venal guy, because he never had any money. He was always broke. But he thought that fighting for money separated him from his commander's vanity, or from the vanity of whatever country he was fighting for, because, a flag or a cause. So, and then when he appeared in the next book, it was like 150 years later, but he was the same guy and he hadn't aged. And so now I'm starting to again, I didn't plan this. And I'm starting to realize, this guy is like the eternal soldier, he's
like Highlander.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't kill him.
Yeah. And so like war is eternal, is never going to go away. This is the soldier is eternal, right? The warriors don't really change. And he was, I thought, stuck in the warrior archetype.
Right.
To go back to, I'm probably talking way too long about this, but
no, I wanted to go through the archetypes as well. So this is a good place to insert that.
I think like this book, A Man at Arms, is a Western. The genre is a Western, even though it happened in, the first century AD in the Sinai Desert. And I think that the classic Western hero in our movies, like a Clint Eastwood type of character or a samurai type of character, samurai movies are Westerns too, right? Is usually a warrior. He's deep in the warrior archetype. Like he's a man of violence, right? The first option in any situation is to kill the other person, right? But these great heroes that we love to see movies, Shane or John Wayne and the Searchers, they're aware that they're kind of stuck in this archetype and that it's not really the ultimate archetype at all. They have moral qualms about it, and they're looking for whatever's next. They're trying to get beyond the warrior archetype, which I'm sure that's been your journey once you got out of the SEALs, right? What's beyond this? What's the next, archetype? So that's what I wanted to do with this character of Telamon, who I consider like the one-man killing machine of the ancient world. How is he going to evolve to whatever comes next? And so it's a spiritual journey, and that's what I put him on.
It seems like in this current book of Man at Arms, he finally broke free of the warrior archetype and was able to transcend into something new. Like, and I'm not sure what that new would be.
I'm not either, but it involves love.
Right. That's right. I was going to say almost like a teacher or mentor, right, to the little girl, or a father figure. Yeah, it's fascinating. Do you think this is, well, you probably won't be able to answer this. Do you think this is the end of Telamon, or do you think
No, I don't. In fact, I'm terrified of when I have to take him to the next stage because I have no idea what it's going to be.
Tell us about the origin of a Man at Arms and the story about Paul's letter, St. Paul's letter.
Okay. A few years ago, my niece got married, and she asked me to be the officiant at the wedding. And the long story is, my brother had secretly married them before that, but I was going to do the public thing. So I had to come up with like a little ceremony. So I went to the Book of Common Prayer and I started looking through it, and I'm finding, love believeth all things, endureth all things, hopeth all things. And for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. I found, a bunch of quotes that I knew and that I loved. And then I realized they all came from the same place. They came from the book in the New Testament called 1 Corinthians, which is the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the fledgling Christian community in Corinth, in Greece. And so that was a real letter, right? It wasn't, it wasn't just the Bible, right? It was a real letter. And so it occurred to me, I started to think about this like as a writer. And I thought, at that time, the Roman Empire is running everything, right? Judea, everything. This letter would be like the atomic bomb of that era, because if it got disseminated, communities were going to spring up and Rome could be overcome. And in fact, Rome was overcome.
Because of this zealots.
The rise of Christianity, right?
Right. Ah, fascinating.
So I thought, there's a story here. If Rome is trying to stop this letter, that's like a chase movie already, right? A chase story. And then I thought, if I can bring my guy Telamon in here and put him in one, let's say that Rome hires him, stop this freaking letter, don't let it get through. Then I've got him already in an interesting moral situation where this letter is like, it's like the Bhagavad Gita. It's this highly charged spiritual thing, which if he knew what it was, would change his life. So anyway, that's kind of how it got off the ground, with different elements coming together that I could see would be in conflict.
Right. Is there any historical evidence that Paul's letter,
not that I know of,
caused this?
Completely.
Because it kind of makes sense. Wow.
a lot of times I found when you make up something that just sort of makes sense, it really did happen. And you find
Right.
out later, oh, that did happen,
No doubt.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's got to be something must have happened at that time, stop this freaking letter.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can. The word got out. They must have known that this is going to be
Yeah,
a
yeah.
big deal.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Wow. I mean, I just one more kind of curiosity. This is probably more for me, and I'm encouraging everyone to listen to read Stephen's work, A Man at Arms. It's just phenomenal. And if you haven't read Gates of Fire, I mean, every one of the books are phenomenal.
By the way, Mark, I'm game to do this again anytime you want. I mean, we don't have to cover every base.
Okay, well,
I'm
that's
happy. And if your
thank
people
you.
can stand it, please invite me back. I'm happy to do it.
Oh yeah, we can stand it. We can stand you. We'll definitely do that. But I'm curious about the character of the little girl and why you made her mute. I mean, I love that kind of story. I mean, maybe we have to frame it up a little bit for the listeners again who haven't read the book, and how Teleron, came into contact with, quote, the letter. But it was in this girl's head, and why did you make,
Don't
where
give
did
away
she
too
come
much
from?
now.
I know. I'm sorry. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, that's definitely a spoiler alert. Yeah. So the way that, there's one of the things I needed to do with Telamon to get him out of the warrior archetype type of thing. If you think about Western heroes like Clint Eastwood and those type of movies, they almost always come in contact with another character that's a vulnerable character that needs to be protected in some way. And that character changes them, like in Unforgiven, it was the prostitutes in the town of Big Whiskey. The gal whose face got all scarred up, and Clint Eastwood goes to protect her. And in Seven Samurai, which is also a Western, it's the village the bandits are, messing around with this village, and the samurai go to protect it. So another example is True Grit, the Jeff Bridges version. It's also the John Wayne version, where there's the young girl and this boozy old marshal with a one eye, goes to help her. So I knew as soon as I had this little girl that there was a great chemistry going on between, this one man killing machine and this vulnerable girl. And then to make her sort of the bearer of this letter in her head, that was even better, I thought, as far as drama.
That's interesting. And so the mute part was just her discipline to
yes,
trick
exactly.
people into thinking they couldn't get her to talk.
Yeah, because if you think about, if you're the Apostle Paul and you're trying to get this letter out, how are you going to do it?
Right.
Is it written down? That's pretty easy for somebody to stop that.
Right.
You'd have to have some clever thing. And like in the story, I have the fact that it wasn't just one version of this letter. There were a lot of other versions going out too, to make sure they got through, which is a military thing, right? If you're going to do it, you're going to go it from a lot of ways.
One is none and two is one.
Yeah.
Well, we got to wrap up here soon, but I'm curious, aside from your works, War of Art and Turning Pro, what would you recommend to a budding creative writer to overcome resistance? Like what works have inspired you or helped you?
If we're talking about a pure writer and not just somebody that's a general creative person like an actor or a dancer, there's two wonderful books. One is called Hemingway on Writing.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I'm writing this down, by the way, because I want to get this. I haven't read that yet.
And it's actually not written by Hemingway. It was like an editor, I forgot his name, kind of went through all of Hemingway's books and kind of pulled out paragraphs here and there where Hemingway talked about writing, and then he put it all together. And it's really interesting. There's another great book called Henry Miller on Writing. And he basically, his whole his whole work body of work is about that.
Mhm.
So that's good. Also, Stephen King wrote a great book called On Writing that I
Yeah.
highly recommend.
Okay.
And there's another book by Twyla Tharp, the choreographer,
Uh-huh.
called The Creative Habit. That's really good.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So, any sneak peek at what your current new project is?
I'm kind of superstitious, Mark, about
Okay.
that stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to say anything yet.
Good for you.
Just that it's
That's a
beating
real
the
pro. I
it's
asked
beating
and
the crap out of me. I'll tell you that.
I asked and I did not get it, but if you
Uh-huh.
don't ask, you don't get. That's where we started this whole conversation. Stephen,
Yeah.
it's been a total joy. Thank you so much for your contribution, to
Hey,
this.
thanks so much for having me, Mark. It's great to see you again. It's great to your questions are great. I'm very happy to do this again anytime you want to.
Yeah, I'd love to. We'll give you time to really dig into your next book. Maybe when that comes out and you're ready to promote it,
Okay.
let's get back on the
Whatever.
horn here.
I'll be back in touch.
Oh yeah. All right, Stephen. Thanks so
All right.
much.
Thank you very much, and
Appreciate you.
best to all your peeps that are listening in.
Yeah, and they send you your regards as well. All right, everybody. That's Steven Pressfield. Go check out A Man at Arms wherever you buy your books, audio or written. I can tell you, it's fantastic. Really is, and you'll read it probably in one or two quick settings. And yeah, stay focused and stoke your archetype, and do your practice and be unbeatable. And we'll see you next time. Divine out.